Have you ever been stuck in a job you hated so much that it forced you to completely reinvent yourself?
Oh, man. I mean, I think a lot of people have been there.
Right. But imagine that job was literally sitting in a mud-filled trench in World War I.
Yeah, that's a bit more extreme than a bad desk job.
Just a bit. And the reinvention meant figuring out how to drop an entire army from the sky.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are exploring the life of General Sir Richard Gale.
Also known as Windy to the British Army.
Yeah, affectionately, or maybe fearfully known as Windy. We're pulling from a really comprehensive biographical article today.
Which traces this incredibly unusual military career that spanned both world wars.
Exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to figure out exactly how a struggling student, a guy who was physically unfit for his preferred military branch,
Literally unfit, yeah.
right, how he ended up pioneering airborne warfare and taking a starring role on D-Day.
It's quite the trajectory.
It is. You know, Gale is like that friend of yours who takes a really long time to find their
Yeah.
path.
Oh, yeah. The late bloomer.
Yeah, the one just wandering around trying to figure things out. But once they finally do, they don't just succeed, they completely change the game for everyone else.
It is a phenomenal character arc because his life provides this masterclass in how experiencing systemic catastrophic failure can drive a person to completely rewrite the rulebook.
Failure on a massive scale.
Right, he didn't just survive a flawed system. The bloody slaughter of the First World War trenches fundamentally broke his belief in how armies should operate.
It shattered the whole illusion.
Exactly. And he spent the rest of his life dismantling the ideas that built that nightmare.
But before he was rewriting military doctrine, he was, quite frankly, a spectacularly average guy.
Oh, absolutely average.
The sources show he was born in London in 1896, spent some time in Australia and New Zealand, and then came back to England with, well, thoroughly unremarkable grades.
I mean, he loved to read, but he wasn't an academic star by any stretch.
Not at all. And what I find fascinating is what happens when he tries to join the British Army.
He wants to go into the Royal Artillery, right?
Yes, but he lacks the academic qualifications. And he doesn't even have the physical fitness grades to get into the Royal Military Academy.
Which just leaves him completely adrift. It's this classic mundane origin story.
So mundane. He gives up on the military dream and just follows his father into the insurance business.
Right, he becomes an insurance agent in the city of London.
And the defining feature of this period of his life is that he absolutely loathes every single second of it.
I think anyone listening who has ever sat in a cubicle doing paperwork they despise can relate to that.
Oh, that feeling of pure desperation.
But that hatred of his desk job becomes the catalyst. It pushes him.
It really does.
He starts attending these regular physical training classes and studying relentlessly to pull his grades up, all just to escape the insurance world.
And when World War I breaks out in August 1914, he immediately tries to join up.
But he's only 18, and the medical board still rejects him as unfit.
So he has to spend another full year punishing his body in training before he finally gets accepted into the Sandhurst Military Academy in the summer of 1915.
Which is an achievement in itself.
It is.
Uh,
But, okay, let's unpack this because this is where his life turns on a bizarre bureaucratic typo.
oh, this is my favorite part.
He finally gets his command into the Worcestershire Regiment. He's thrilled,
Naturally.
and he puts his name in to take a course on how to use machine guns.
He thinks he's just going to a training seminar to pick up a new skill.
Exactly. But when he shows up, he discovers he hasn't been sent to a course. He has been permanently transferred to the newly formed Machine Gun Corps.
It's like signing up for a weekend seminar on coding and realizing you've accidentally been drafted into a completely new career as a software engineer.
Perfect analogy. He complains, he asks to go back to his infantry regiment, and the Army bureaucracy basically tells him, shut up and get on with it.
Which drops him straight into the meat of the Western Front.
Yeah, that administrative error lands him at the Battle of the Somme by the summer of 1916.
And later in the Ypres salient. And to understand what he went through, we have to look at the mechanics of the Machine Gun Corps.
Right, this wasn't a glamorous cavalry charge.
Not at all. A salient, by the way, is a bulge in the front line where your territory pushes into enemy territory.
Meaning the enemy is surrounding you on three sides.
Exactly, firing inward.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare of geometry.
It is. And in that nightmare, Gale is operating a Vickers machine gun. These were heavy, water-cooled weapons.
They required a whole team of men to operate.
Yeah. You are sitting in a static, mud-filled crater. You aren't maneuvering, you are just pulling a trigger and watching wave after wave of human beings get cut down.
By the same industrial weapons the enemy is firing back at you.
It was a factory floor of casualties.
And the toll it takes on him is profound. The source notes that by the time of the Passchendaele Offensive in 1917, he completely misses the battle.
Because his body and mind simply give out.
Yeah, he's suffering from severe mental and physical exhaustion, and he's actually diagnosed with pyorrhea.
Ugh, which is horrific.
It's a severe gum disease where your teeth literally loosen in your head, rampant in the unsanitary conditions of the trenches.
So he's sent back to England to recover.
Well, he doesn't stay there. He goes back to the front.
He returns right in time for the German Spring Offensive of 1918.
And this is where he wins the Military Cross for a remarkable act of bravery.
The citation for this is wild.
The Germans are pushing hard.
Yeah.
The British infantry is retreating in chaos, and Gale is trying to cover their withdrawal with his machine guns.
And suddenly, an artillery shell lands right in the middle of his unit's transport.
The horses and the equipment.
Yeah. And under heavy, sustained enemy fire, Gale runs out into the open.
He calms the panicked animals, unhitches the dead and wounded horses, and physically saves the transport so his men can escape.
Incredible. And if we look at the underlying mechanism of that entire experience, from the static mud of the Somme to covering chaotic retreats,
we see how it fundamentally rewired his brain.
yes, he didn't just survive the trauma. He began actively analyzing the fatal flaws of the doctrine that put him in that trench.
He witnessed firsthand the absolute futility of throwing tens of thousands of men at fortified machine gun positions.
The entire concept of military operations that relied solely on overwhelming firepower without any maneuverability, he deeply distrusted it.
Right, because firepower without movement is just two brick walls grinding against each other until one crumbles.
That's a great way to put it.
And he actually noted that in 1918, when tactics finally started to shift toward smaller, faster infiltration units.
Units that bypass strong points instead of charging head-on.
Exactly. He called it a wonderful panorama. He saw the fog lift,
Yeah.
literally and metaphorically.
He finally saw a better way.
But hold on, let me push back a little here on behalf of anyone listening.
Okay, sure.
So he has this grand revelation about mobility. The war ends. And then he just sits there.
Wow.
He stays in the military, but the promotion structure is so clogged that he remains a junior officer or subaltern for 15 years.
That's true.
He is effectively stuck in middle management, writing training pamphlets at the War Office. How on earth does a guy who just survived the Somme not just throw his hands up and go back to insurance?
What's fascinating here is it speaks entirely to his sheer, unyielding stubbornness.
He must have been incredibly stubborn.
Oh, completely. Those interwar years were notoriously stagnant. Budgets were slashed, ranks frozen. Innovation was actively discouraged.
A terrible time to have new ideas.
But Gale used that 15-year wait to quietly, methodically build his philosophy.
He attended the staff college at Quetta in India, right?
Yeah, getting above-average reviews for his analytical mind. He studied the failures of 1916 and the successes of 1918.
He became an uncompromising advocate for the fundamental necessity of mobility.
And the absolute importance of surprise at all levels of warfare. He was gestating an entirely new way of fighting, waiting for the technology to catch up.
He just needed a blank canvas to prove his theories. A battlefield where mobility wasn't just a nice advantage, but the only option.
And World War II provided exactly that.
Dropping men from the sky.
When WWII kicks off, Gale is finally given a chance to implement his philosophy. By 1940, he's given command of a territorial army unit, the Leicestershire Regiment.
And he doesn't just manage them, he completely overhauls their culture.
He does.
But how does he actually do that, though? Because saying you reformed a unit sounds great on paper, but what does it look like on the ground?
Well, it looked like ending the obsession with parade ground polishing.
Getting rid of the spit and shine.
Exactly, focusing entirely on combat effectiveness. He pushed them to their absolute physical peaks with relentless field exercises.
He instilled a level of professional pride that was really uncommon for a reserve unit then.
And he did it so effectively that the top brass took notice, specifically General Sir Alan Brooke.
So when the British Army decided it desperately needed to expand its brand new, highly experimental airborne forces in 1941.
Brooke tapped Gale to command the 1st Parachute Brigade.
And Gale immediately delivers results.
Big time.
In February 1942, part of his brigade pulls off Operation Biting, better known as the Bruneval Raid.
Which is straight out of a heist movie.
It really is. They literally drop by parachute into snow-covered France in the dead of night.
They assault a cliffside German radar station.
Dismantle and steal the critical technological components of a radar system, and then fight their way down to a beach to be extracted by the Royal Navy.
It is a monumental success.
But Gale knows that the parachute jump is only the commute to the office.
Right, the easy part.
Once you hit the ground, the real problem begins. I mean, I want you listening to imagine for a second that you are a paratrooper.
Okay.
You've just hurled yourself out of a vibrating metal tube into the freezing dark. You've landed in a farmer's field, your parachute is tangled in a tree, you are completely alone.
You only have the ammunition in your pouches.
And there are zero tanks or artillery backing you up. You have to figure it out.
And that reality required a total departure from traditional military training.
Which brings us to the core of Gale's legendary leadership philosophy.
He realized that the kind of soldier who volunteers to jump out of an airplane already possesses a unique psychological makeup.
They have to conquer a primal fear of falling every single time they jump.
But he knew the absolute most important quality an airborne officer needed wasn't bravery, it was initiative.
Yes. And he had this very specific practical test he used when interviewing candidates.
The tank anecdote.
This is brilliant. He would sit a young candidate down and ask a hypothetical question.
He'd say, suppose you have just landed in enemy territory in the pitch black, and you hear the approach of what you think is an enemy tank. What do you do?
And so often, these traditionally trained, polite British officers would give the textbook answer.
Sir, I would get on the blower of the radio and inform my company commander to ask for orders.
And if they said that, Gale failed them instantly.
He wanted action, not bureaucrats hanging decisions on their superiors.
We have to ask why he was so aggressively against the standard chain of command here. It wasn't just him being a rebel.
No, if we look at the mechanics of airborne warfare then, Gale was creating a culture of decentralized command out of pure life-or-death necessity.
In the 1940s, dropping out of an airplane meant you were almost guaranteed to be scattered miles from your drop zone.
Radios broke upon impact. If a paratrooper waits for an officer to tell them what to do, they die.
So Gale's philosophy was essentially, I have trained you, I trust you to make the call act.
Exactly.
But creating this elite culture means absolutely nothing if you don't have the airplanes to actually get them to the battlefield.
Right.
Gale gets promoted to Director of Air at the War Office, and he steps right into this incredibly bitter inter-service rivalry with the Royal Air Force.
The friction there comes down to competing doctrines.
How so?
Well, the RAF firmly believed that strategic bombing campaigns dropping high explosives on German factories and cities would win the war single-handedly.
So they viewed every bomber given to the Army as a wasted resource.
Exactly. They had zero interest in handing over their precious, expensive aircraft just so Gale could use them as glorified flying buses.
So Gale had to fight tooth and nail in the boardrooms of London just to secure the logistical transport his men needed.
And all of that theory, all of that intense physical training and those brutal bureaucratic knife fights with the RAF.
It all culminated in one historical night, June 1944, Operation Tonga.
D-Day. Gale is now a major general commanding the newly formed 6th Airborne Division.
The pressure on his shoulders is astronomical.
No British airborne division had ever been deployed into battle entirely through aerial means.
And their objective was critical. They were tasked with securing the far eastern flank of the entire Allied invasion force in Normandy.
If they failed, German panzer divisions could roll right down the flank and push the seaborne landing forces back into the English Channel.
They had to capture bridges over the River Orne and the Caen Canal, blow up other bridges to block reinforcements, and destroy the heavily fortified Merville gun battery.
And Gale isn't managing this from a bunker in London. At dawn on D-Day, he lands in Normandy himself.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because this is the craziest part of the whole operation.
It really is.
Doesn't parachute in. He lands in a wooden glider.
Yeah.
Not an airplane with an engine. An unpowered wooden box. Howell was throwing soldiers at the ground in the dark in giant wooden kites. Not considered a complete suicide mission.
It sounds absurd to modern ears, but there was a very specific mechanical reason for it.
Okay, what was it?
Paratroopers drop scattered? Right. It takes them hours to find each other and assemble into a fighting force.
Right.
A glider, however, allows an entire platoon of 30 men, along with a heavy anti-tank gun or a jeep, to land precisely together, ready to fight the second the door opens.
Oh, wow. So they were towed across the English Channel by heavy bombers And then the tow line was cut.
From that moment, the glider pilots were flying purely on aerodynamics,
Using stopwatches and moonlight to silently glide toward tiny strips of French farmland.
avoiding trees, ditches, and anti-glider poles the Germans had planted.
The skill required to do that is just unimaginable.
And it resulted in an incredible operational achievement.
Shortly after midnight, several of these gliders crash-landed almost exactly on top of their targets at the Carding Canal and Orne River bridges.
Which history now remembers as Pegasus Bridge. It was a perfect coup de main.
And for anyone listening not familiar with the term, a coup de main is essentially a lightning-fast, complete surprise attack.
It's kicking the door down and overwhelming the enemy before they even realize they are in a fight.
Precisely. They secured the bridges with very light casualties because the speed and silence of the gliders provided absolute surprise.
Across the rest of the zone, paratroopers dropped in the dark. Many drowned in fields the Germans had intentionally flooded, unfortunately, but they rallied.
The Merville gun battery fell after a brutal close-quarters assault, though with devastating losses.
But by the time the sun came up, Gale's division had successfully anchored the entire left flank of the D-Day invasion.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens a couple of months later is what truly proves the doctrine Gale had been writing since 1918.
This is the part of the story that really highlights his genius.
By mid-August, the German army is finally breaking and retreating across France. Gale's division is ordered to go on the offensive and pursue them.
Now keep in mind the mechanics of an airborne division. They are light infantry.
They carry what they drop with.
Exactly. They don't have heavy tanks. They don't have an extensive fleet of transport trucks.
Even Gale and his corps commander looked at the situation and thought they were poorly equipped for a rapid overland pursuit.
But despite lacking heavy armor, Gale's division pushes the retreating Germans 45 miles to the Seine River in just 9 days.
Which is just absurd, advancing 45 miles in 9 days without proper pursuit equipment.
How they achieve that is the ultimate validation of Gale's belief in mobility.
Because they lacked heavy equipment, they couldn't fight traditional set-piece battles.
Right. Instead, Gale relied entirely on the initiative of his junior officers.
They moved relentlessly, often at night. They bypassed heavy German strongpoints,
cutting off supply lines and forcing the heavier, slower German units to retreat or be surrounded.
Empowered troops making decisions on the fly, completely outmaneuvered a heavier, more established force.
They captured 400 square miles of territory and took over 1,000 prisoners.
It's incredible. And Gale carried this forward. He later famously opposed Operation Market Garden, the doomed bridge-too-far plan.
Because he recognized the mechanical flaws in dropping troops too far from armored relief.
And if we look at his post-war career, this mindset just continued to evolve.
He served in Palestine, in Egypt, and eventually in 1958, he succeeded Field Marshal Montgomery as the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe for NATO.
During those Cold War years at NATO, Gale was constantly analyzing warfare in the nuclear age.
He was looking at the vast, heavily armored Soviet threat across the Iron Curtain.
He stressed that trying to match the Soviets tank for tank in a static defense would just be a repeat of WWI.
The only defense was extreme mobility, fast counterattacks, and flexibility.
He was essentially foreshadowing the airland battle doctrine, right?
Exactly the concept of closely coordinating aggressive ground maneuvers with air support that the military wouldn't fully adopt until the 1980s.
It is an amazing degree of foresight. But to fully understand a man who reshaped modern warfare from the trenches to the Cold War, we really have to look at his personality.
And how his story concludes.
Right, because his personal life is as dramatic and colorful as his military record.
We mentioned earlier that his nickname was Windy.
Yes, this was because he had an incredibly loud, booming voice and a hectoring, larger-than-life manner.
The historical sources describe him as tall, bluff, ruddy, and a bit of a buccaneer.
He wasn't a quiet, contemplative academic sitting in the corner with a pipe. He was a force of nature who took up all the oxygen in the room.
And if you examine what he actually accomplished, it took exactly that kind of overbearing buccaneer personality to succeed.
You simply cannot be a polite, quiet bureaucrat if your goal is to march into the traditional, rigid British War Office, point at a map, and demand that they put thousands of men into flimsy wooden gliders.
And drop them behind enemy lines in the pitch dark.
It required a loud, stubborn rule breaker to force that vision into reality.
He certainly forced it.
Gale eventually passed away peacefully at his home in 1982, just after his 86th birthday.
But the historical footprint of the Gale family has this incredibly bizarre, tragic coda.
His second wife, Daphne, survived him. And because of Gale's monumental service to the country, Daphne was granted a grace and favor apartment within Hampton Court Palace.
Which is the historic Tudor home of King Henry VIII outside London.
Now, Daphne had a deeply ingrained habit of keeping a lighted candle in her bedroom at night.
And in March 1986, that unattended candle caused a devastating fire.
Tragically, Daphne lost her life in the blaze, and the fire completely gutted a wing of the historic palace.
Requiring a complex 4-year restoration program to fix.
It is this strange, tragic irony, but it leaves you in awe of the sheer scope of history this family touched.
From the mud of the Somme in 1916 to the skies over Normandy in 1944, all the way to a historic fire at a Tudor palace in the 1980s.
It is a remarkable, almost cinematic arc of a life lived entirely at the center of historical forces.
Definitely.
So what does this all mean? If we distill Richard Gale's life for you listening today, the key takeaway is how he processed failure.
He took the darkest, most traumatic experience imaginable, the systemic failure and the static industrial slaughter of the WWI trenches.
And instead of letting the trauma break him, he used it to study the mechanics of why it happened.
He took the absolute worst job in the world, sitting still in the mud under artillery fire, and transformed his revulsion of it into a lifelong obsession with doing things differently.
He birthed the philosophy of ultimate mobility, speed, and above all, absolute trust in the people working under him.
And that leaves us with a fascinating thought to consider for our own lives.
Yeah.
Gale's defining trait as a leader was teaching his paratroopers to act without asking for permission.
Right, the tank test.
He demanded that his people not hang decisions on their superiors. Today, we live in a corporate and technological world that allows for constant connection.
We can track every metric, monitor every keystroke, essentially look over everyone's shoulder all the time.
Exactly. Our systems often encourage deep micromanagement under the guise of efficiency. But what if Gale was right?
In a fast-moving environment where the radios are broken, so to speak.
How might his philosophy of extreme trust and decentralized initiative fundamentally change how we lead in our own projects and our own workplaces?
It really makes you wonder. If you're stuck in a system you hate, maybe the answer isn't just to survive it, but to study its flaws and figure out how to completely rewrite the rules.
Absolutely.
After all, if a miserable insurance agent can figure out how to drop an army from the sky, who knows what you could pull off?